Thank you, Jay. Thank you for the invitation to speak and two great talks to follow. So, and I've got the really exciting talk about data coordination. And there's a lot here, so it's going to be a very high-level overview. I did start with about 80 slides yesterday, so I've tried to cut it down a little bit. But just to say, also my daughter took part, my daughter took part in the kids' trial. She was very happy she was randomized to having her teddy with her at night time, I've got to say. But any non-adherence or not filling out things was her father's fault rather than hers. It was my email address on it. So, okay, so just a bit of my sort of experience for those that don't know me. I'm going to talk mainly about, you've had a lot of Remap CAP. So we run the Data Coordination Centre at Remap CAP. We've been leading with Imperial, running the UK part of recruitment on Remap CAP. But also we set up a recent platform trial called Pivotal in paediatric ICU, which we started recruitment probably about 6 weeks ago now. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and then use that really as examples for most of it. So this is Pivotal. It's very similar design to Remap CAP. We're evaluating 3 different domains of treatment. So patients are assessed for sort of assessed for platform eligibility. And then for each domain, we've got 3 different domains: fluid management, sedation. Patients for those have to be ventilated, and then a transfusion domain, which is any organ support but having a low hemoglobin. And also that may come a little bit later downstream, so it may not always be randomized at the same time as fluid and sedation. And it works as a similar way, collecting the outcomes once and looking at interim analysis every sort of 4 months or so. But as I say, we've just started. So a bit of this is work in progress. What I just wanted to cover in 15 minutes and very briefly, it's sort of something about systems and what systems you're using, which I think is important when it comes to data. A bit about the collection and scoping the data, oversight and monitoring, which I think is the most important part to make sure that these studies are actually of a high quality. The Remap CAP part is thinking about coordination of multiple different data systems, what Neil talked about, the federation aspect. As to also talk, I've got a couple of slides on funding and regulatory considerations that sit around data. Okay, so data systems. The 2 real options. One is sort of outsourcing. So Remap CAP, for example, uses a company called Spiral, which they're a software company who build your database, but you're really outsourcing. You've got to provide a specification, outsource what your requirements are for your platform. So you're very much in the hands of that company. There are other options. Castor, I think, are used a lot across Europe and actually look at this sort of end-to-end sort of clinical trial. There are benefits, but these are bespoke designs. They've got very flexible sort of systems, often have experience in platform sort of trials, and often will incorporate sort of an eTMF, for example, and working with a site file, but they can be quite expensive. When I say quite expensive, very expensive, but you also lose the control centrally to make adaptations quickly and keep everything sort of in-house. Regulatory compliance, especially when you're thinking internationally, also is a bit of a challenge when using somebody else's. You're very much within their structure. Thinking about internal, there are lots of different options internally. And what I'd probably say is, so there's Open Clinica, these are just 3 options of 6 or 7, but you have to really do your testing to understand what works, whether these work for a platform trial, because they are set up in a very structured way. So you're pulling software off-the-shelf software that you be able to adapt into a platform. You need, therefore, internal expertise to be able to run this. You don't need programmers necessarily, but you need data managers who are experienced with logic and running and developing these sort of systems. But you have increased control over what you are doing, how you specify the data, and how you can make adaptations. You're within your own timeframes rather than an external company. They're also become cheaper, especially when if you run 5, 10, 15, some will run 100 studies, that you can implement them across all of your studies. It becomes cheaper and cheaper the more you use it. But you need extensive sort of testing and review prior to purchasing the right system. Often they don't have things like randomization embedded within them, and if they do, they may not be sufficient for what you need for a platform. They may not be complex enough. This is what we've used for we went down as Open Clinica for our electronic case report form. But we did months of testing systems to make sure that we got one that worked for our specific solution. And we used sealed envelope for a randomization. They created a whole new system and had to create a whole new system just to create Pivotal, which is 3 different randomization systems. Their system couldn't do it. They also have an embedded module within Open Clinica, which was not complex enough to run the randomizations. Because if you think you have to have, we've got, well, I didn't say in Pivotal, we have 2 different strata, cardiac, non-cardiac strata, that actually you need to be able to have the functionality for hospitals to have different interventions per strata, take part in different domains, and it's really complex. But we have data that now pipes directly from sealed envelope into Open Clinica whenever there's a randomization. Just touching on data collection. So just thinking about what the data principles are. This cannot be 4 big studies and big data collection manuals merged into one, because you'll just annoy everybody at sites and you will lose a lot of the efficiencies of data collection of the platform. And this is how we sort of look at it for Pivotal. We have a core data set that covers baseline variables, like severity of illness, etc., some concomitant medication potentially, and their outcomes really. So thinking about even long-term outcomes for quality of life questionnaires, but our core platform level outcomes. But then we have different modules that are linked into that. So, and we keep these as minimal as possible. So we have a treatment module for fluids, treatment module for sedation, one for red blood cell transfusions, and then also if there are domain-specific outcomes and safety outcomes that are important, we'll collect those separately. But the vast majority is within that core data set. Also, it's really, I think Neil showed this, or somebody showed this earlier, we're thinking about recovery and the use of routine data. And I think this is really important in platforms. Make use, let's not double collect data, make use of routine data that's out there to do as much as possible with these platforms as you can. As I said, recovery had a 1-page CRF. I don't think that's enough, by the way, but they used a lot of other data sets to try and keep it. And it's what you may need in a pandemic when you've got your huge recruitment. So just a few thoughts that I jotted down really would keep the burden as low as possible for sites taking part. Aligning data definitions across domains really actually takes a lot more time than you think. And it's a lot harder than you think. You've got multiple protocols. Cam's probably done this about 1 million times on Remap Cam. But one domain wants something, another domain wants something else, and you've got to be able to align just to reduce that burden and come to compromises. Compromise is really key, but you cannot have that impact the study. Utilizing routine data, as I say, is important, but you need to understand the quality of the data source, so the accuracy, completeness of the data source, and the timeliness, especially if you're thinking about using it for adaptive or interim analyses. Have you got that data in time, etc., for all your patients? But it can also be used for additional things, like understanding the inclusivity of the platform. So we've got approval to link all our screening logs to the National Clinical Audit, so we can see exactly which patients are excluded from the study for which reasons, and and it helps us understand just the process of recruiting patients into the trial and why different groups may not be recruited. There's also in your data, looking for potential added benefits. If, for example, we show that conservative fluid is beneficial after the trial, what we'll do is reopen the fluid treatment module, maybe in 6 months' time and 12 months' time, to actually recruit the patients recruited onto the platform. We'll start collecting some data on results we've already published to see if that actually did change clinical practice and feed that back to sites. So this is sort of the main part that I think has added complexity with platforms. I'll show you a bit of stuff that we're doing that's quite early stage, but I think it just examples the point. This is sort of roughly a normal governance structure for a trial. Clinical trials unit, you have different oversight committees, a sponsor, with sort of unblinded statisticians going into the DSMB. These are additional groups, and I've left out some as well. So we've also got prioritization committees, etc. But we've got statistics, health economics working group, a patient and public advisory group, and probably the main one are 3 different domain-specific working group who all need data. And I think this is really key. So to have adequate sort of central study oversight, you need to be able to understand sort of established responsibility for each of those committees. What order are they seeing the data on? Who's feeding back to who? How are we implementing and changing things with hospitals? So you have to establish what data each committee needs to actually support that sort of responsibility. And overall, trial management group or trial steering committee get to see overall sort of platform trial metrics. We look at it as domain exception reporting, whereas domain-specific working groups need to have a full understanding of what is happening in their domain. How's recruitment, how's adherence, et cetera, to their specific interventions. And then the DSMB obviously have the adaptive analysis, secondary outcomes, safety monitoring. But then what are clinical trials unit doing? We need to look at study and site quality triggers. Do we need to have on-site monitoring for those? Do we need to pick up adherence issues with specific sites? And it's around data cleaning and completeness. So everybody understanding their role and getting the data to support that role. I just want to touch on sort of what we're doing for committees. I say we are relatively early into this, so thinking about steering committees, domain working groups, and data safety sort of monitoring boards. I don't expect you can read this, but this is just how we are thinking about it. I don't know if I can point here properly, not very well. So these are all the different areas we think we need data on down the left. So we've got sort of the first one is domain-specific working group, platform trial management group, trial steering committee, and data monitoring committee. And we're trying to create a report that covers each one of those aspects with different aspects of it going to each of the committee who know what they need. So we have detailed adherence for each of the domain-specific working group, detailed recruitment. Why are patients not going into their specific domain? But then they need to report to the trial management group, and we're ordering the meetings to allow those sort of things. And we're just starting this. This is sort of what we're doing. We've only really got to recruitment because we've just sort of started. So this is from the 3rd of June. These are live reports that I just pulled from our sort of website or internal process at the moment, but we're currently only on recruitment things. So we had the 3rd of June, about 6 weeks in, we had 12 sites open. It's a bit more now. We had so you can see here, 240 patients recruited in sort of the first 6 weeks or so. You can toggle between total and by strata. I say we had cardiac and non-cardiac and cardiac strata, so you can see the split between the strata. This is all just for the platform trial management group and the CTU to actually understand what is happening, and we can look at this any time. Don't worry about the dip. It was done on the 3rd of June, so June looks pretty average. But then you can see recruitment across so you can toggle on each of the top aspects to see in the fluid, non-cardiac is what this is. And then sedation, non-cardiac. Fluid is only open in the non-cardiac. And then also thinking about the metrics across our patients recruited into 1, 2, or 3 of the domains. And so we can see fluid and sedation, most patients in non-cardiac should always be eligible for both. And as you see, 85 of so we've got 240 patients, but probably 375 randomizations or so across those. So people have been randomized into multiple domains. And these are the sort of things we're trying to implement to be able to. The next stage is sort of more looking at adherence measures, but we just need a few more patients and a bit of time to get those in. And it's just about the importance of setting these up as early as you can into the study, because a study that recruits quickly will get out of hand on all of these measures. Quick comment on sort of adaptive interim analyses. So this is really important. We're ensuring sort of regular interim analysis. We need availability of key data and information, clear specification across all of the analysis, and actually being able to feed into those around sort of the completeness of the important outcomes and validation sort of within and between extracts. Trials unit, just quick aspects. I've mentioned this, I won't spend long. It's really just identifying issues at sites that we can communicate directly from the trials unit to the sites, and learning across domains and where there's multiple regions, and adapt our on-site monitoring process from the knowledge of the data as we go through. Okay. okay, so just thinking through, this is what we normally have, and this is what we have on Pivotal and ECRF data management. This is what we had on Remap Cap. So we came in as the data coordination center, and we had, 8 different data providers, all collecting data in a slightly different way, which was really helpful to pull together. And that was because they were just set up quickly within a pandemic, and we used different routine data sources. So it was around, so the idea of merging and cleaning the data to provide individual data extracts to analysis committees. It also includes, as I think Neil Danny mentioned earlier, the addition of sort of multi-platform RCTs and bringing in data from other trials. Here, what was important was really understanding the structure of the different data sets, the reporting potential from each of the platforms. I think it's really important. Federation, I think, is really important and really helpful. And we shouldn't be restricted, but we really need to put a process in place to enable it and think about clear data and export specifications to pull them all into a single data set. But for doing that, mapping to future or to relevant data standards such as CDISC, I think, is really important. So the data sets are interoperable between them. I've got a slide on funding of data. So it came up a couple of times. The funding model is really, I think, important to develop a sustainable business model. We've got one for Pivotal, which is we always want 3 domains open. We've got initial funding that covers those 3 domains, but we know we're not going to keep getting that funding. So the idea will be that we have shared central costs, which we think should lead to 3 cheaper grant applications, which enables different people to get the grants rather than just always being the chief investigator of Pivotal to hold those grants. This is just an example for a new domain. For the data point, we'd expect amendments to randomization systems, the modular data sets, site costs for collection of data, but also shared costs. So they'll cost in a proportion of the shared cost, database licenses, central on-site monitoring, archiving, and sort of cleaning and provision of extracts, but that is just within a business model. Last couple of slides, because I imagine I'm well over. Risk assessment, so regulatory considerations. This, I think, is really important in platforms. And this is really thinking within a data context. So we have for Pivotal a master risk assessment, but also one for each of the domains. So we can see an overall risk that we have with the core protocol and the master protocol, but actually thinking about the individual domains and having something adaptable that, because we may have a low risk domain, a higher risk domain, but how do you create your data that's actually flexible to be able to cope with different risk domains? So you may have different SAE reporting structures depending on the domain and the risk. So in summary, choose the data system that's right for you in your trial. Data collection should be focused. Clarity regarding responsibility of oversight and making sure data are available to those people. Sure, there's high quality of data sets and data sources, open to federation but planned prospectively, and it should be part of a sustainable core funding model but be adaptable to meet sort of regulatory requirements. Thank you.